We're back with Adam Hopkins, running for sheriff in 2018. Thanks for joining us again.
You're welcome.
Today we're going to have a conversation that will probably surprise a lot of people that we're about to have it. And we're going to talk about LGBTi rights and how they apply to law enforcement and incarceration. So thank you for being open enough to have this conversation. What sparked your desire to talk to us about that today?
There are a couple of reasons why I called and asked if we could have this conversation. One of them is that I have been involved with a local group called the Transgender Allies Group for several years now, attending their meetings because I felt that this population needed to be heard and needed to have a platform. So I felt as an ally to that group, I could actually make a difference. I'm also a Department of Justice auditor, as I've explained previously, where I deal with LGBTI issues in jails and prisons. But more importantly, I look at what's happening in our country today and look at law enforcement and look at our citizens feeling the need to police their police. And if that is the way our society is feeling now, there's absolutely something wrong. And I think that LGBTI issues is just one of those. And we're going to have further conversations about this as we move forward in this process. But today I'd really like to focus on the LGBTI issues and why we need to address that with our community.
What's really interesting is if you try to judge a book by its cover, I would not have guessed that you've been attending these TAG Transgender Ally Group meetings for as long as you have. It's obvious that you're committed to a platform that's on your website called Bridging the Gap. And let's talk about that part of this, because that's just one piece of the gap that you feel exists between community and law enforcement. So let's talk about the issues that affect the transgender LGBTI members of our community and how that applies to law enforcement as well.
You know, it's interesting you should say that I don't look a certain way. If you were to speak to members of the LGBTI community here, they would tell you that it's imperative that we not judge somebody by the way they look, because the way they look is not necessarily who they are. So we have to be very careful with that. But one of my platforms on my website is Bridging the Gap. So this is absolutely a gap, but there are many, many other gaps that we're going to have to bridge. And the LGBTI gap just happens to be in the forefront right now. And so as we move forward and figure out what the best course of action is for law enforcement has to be in that conversation.
This does present challenges, I would maybe call them, for law enforcement in their interactions in the public. And it also, I just found out, really affects how these individuals are incarcerated. So let's talk about how this really applies to law enforcement.
Our citizens should not ever have to worry about their interactions with law enforcement at any level. It doesn't matter what their religion is, what their sexual orientation is, what their skin color is. Every citizen in this valley needs to be treated with respect and dignity. And the sheriff that runs this department needs to understand that intrinsically and be able to communicate that with their employees and with the citizens of Washoe County. And I'm that guy. I can bring about the filling of that gap, and that's my plan. It doesn't just happen though when we are interacting with citizens on the street, because ultimately people are going to be incarcerated. So we need to deal with all of the issues that anybody would face when they're incarcerated. So when it comes to the LGBTI community, it has to do with identification and housing and medical care, essentially all the same things that any inmate of any race or sexual orientation would have to face. So in one way it's very specific, in other ways it's very general. We just need to treat everybody as we would like to be treated and as they deserve to be treated.
What fascinated me was something you recently posted on your Facebook. which was that when it comes to the transgender population, that this really applies to potential in-custody fatalities. So talk to me about that.
There was a recent study in Nevada that showed that 67% of transgenders have thought about suicide. 38% had actually attempted suicide. So when they come into our custody, it's imperative that we train to recognize the issues that they may be facing and keep them safe, as we do with anybody that's in our custody. Remember what I said previously, our two missions in detention are care and custody of inmates.
Speaking of in-custody fatalities, that's one thing that can lead to them if people are not prepared and trained for that. You're also a certified trainer on the subject of excited delirium, and we've recently in Washoe County had a couple of those cases causing death. So talk to me about that.
The dopamine in your brain builds and builds and builds, and because your body is not able to metabolize that, when that happens in your hypothalamus, you have what they call a heat event. So you have hyperthermia. And when I say hyperthermia, I'm not talking about 101, 102 degrees. I'm talking anywhere from 106 to 110 degrees. That will immediately shut down your brain and cause a heart-related event where a person can die within seconds. This is a syndrome that can occur within seconds. So if officers are trained to recognize the signs and symptoms and then trained how to deal with them so that we keep them alive, so we stop treating them as an inmate until we can make sure that they are safe and healthy, treat them as a patient, then we can go back to treating them as an inmate. We have to keep them alive. We need to keep them alive long enough to get them to medical care. And I'm not talking about simple CPR training. I'm talking about advanced medical care.
Before you retired, you were training at the Washoe County Sheriff Office, excited delirium classes. And just after one, something happened. Tell me about that.
Shortly after I began training deputies in the jail on excited delirium, we had a gentleman come in as an inmate that was suffering from excited delirium. I watched the tape of this entire incident, and I could hear one of the officers that I had trained actually say, "I believe this is excited delirium." And what was so exciting was that they immediately shifted from treating this person as an inmate to treating this person as a patient, because they knew if they didn't intercede medically right then and there, that this person could die. This person was transported immediately to the local hospital. He died once on the way and was brought back. While he was at the hospital, he died another time, and they brought him back. We started getting phone calls saying, "You better prepare because this person is not going to make it." Ultimately, he lived.
Wow.
So our deputies, through this training, saved this man's life. So I started being used by my agency to train all the deputies as they were going through the academy. That is exactly what needed to happen. I was so excited to be able to give this information. And then at some point they simply stopped using us and stopped using me to train. And I'm not sure what caused that, but I can tell you the outcome was we had 2 excited delirium deaths recently.
Do I understand correctly, you actually received an award for that life that was saved?
Yes, I did receive an award from the Institute for the Prevention of In-Custody Death. It was the Agitated Chaotic Events Award. However, that award really should not have gone to me. It was given to me because I was the one that presented it and trained it, but it really should have gone to the officer who identified it. He's the one that actually saved that life, along with all the other deputies that were there that night.
Here's what I absolutely love about you running for Washoe County Sheriff in 2018. You don't just talk about the issues, you have real life solutions for them. You're already in the conversation, and hopefully the things that you're talking about will be in place even before you take office. Thank you so much for joining us again and for your commitment to our community and the safety of the inmates.
You're welcome.